Okay, it's 7:03. Why don't I get get this started then? Thank you all for joining this virtual forum on the future of North Capitol Street. As a reminder, when you logged in, the announcement should have told you that this is being recorded. This is being recorded. We're going to divide the evening into three parts. We have proponents of the Community Boulevard and separately proponents of the Deckover proposal. And then we will have a question and answer period following both presentations. At 7:05, we'll start with Nick and Connor to talk about the Community Boulevard, and that will end at 7:35. And I'll be your moderator throughout. And at 7:35, I'll turn it over to the North Capitol Deckover presenters, who are Thaddeus, Mark, Teri Janine, and Bertha. Bertha's not quite here with us yet, but she will be soon. Asking to put all your questions, if possible, please put them in the Q&A box down on the bottom of your Zoom screen on the right side there. Click Q&A and put them in there if possible. But that'll be and hold your questions until the end of the presentations. We're hoping from 8 to 8:30 approximately is when we'll have questions and answers. And I'm going to ask the presenters of both proposals separately if you would put in chat a point of contact for anyone who has questions that they might want to ask you in person or separately or for follow-up. I will be announcing that for the two groups who are separate groups that are presenting, I'll be calling it a 3-minute and 1-minute warning as they approach the end of their 30 minutes. And ask questions in the final 30 minutes on any aspect of this. Many of the questions may be directed to one particular presentation or the other, but as moderator, I will give both groups the opportunity to respond if they feel that's appropriate. It is 7:05 now, and I am going to mute everyone except for Nick and Connor and myself. If I can figure out how to do that. Where did it hide down here, Nick? I'm not seeing in this version of I'm not seeing a mute all down here.
I think we'll probably be okay. It's just the panelists who have the ability, and they seem to have themselves self-muted. So.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over and start the 30-minute clock running there, and turn it over to Nick and Connor until 7:35. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kirby, and thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. We appreciate you spending some time thinking about North Capitol Street. Nick and I are going to be presenting the Community Boulevard vision. And just by way of introduction, wanted to say a few words about ourselves. Nick runs an advocacy organization called Ward 5 for All, and I am president of the Eckington Civic Association. And both of us are longtime residents of the corridor. We've been working with a coalition of businesses and organizations and local residents like you who want to transform North Capitol Street. You can see a few of those organizations on this slide. We have 3 goals tonight. The first is to advocate for a community boulevard, which we think addresses some of the corridor's biggest flaws. We want to explain why we think the Deckover proposal is too limited a vision for the corridor. And third, we want to enlist your support in advocating for what we think is a decent compromise, a community boulevard with a signature park at Lincoln Road. An important aspect of this is that DDOT, the District Department of Transportation, is going to be launching a study sometime in the next year, which is going to be considering the feasibility of the 2 options here, as well as other improvements to address safety throughout the corridor. This forum is not a replacement for DDOT's process, but we're hoping that if the ideas that we share with you tonight are attractive and exciting, we'll hope that you will join us in advocating with DDOT about those ideas. We also want to acknowledge the history of the corridor and its darker history. Like many other corridors across our city and country, North Capitol Street was redesigned in the 1960s to prioritize white commuters at the expense of local Black residents. And that wasn't that long ago. About 60 years ago, North Capitol Street was changed for the worse. And we really have a big opportunity coming up to restore what was lost. We're going to start by laying out some of the major problems for North Capitol Street, and I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to hand it over to Nick to talk about our vision, which we think addresses some of those problems. And we want to start by giving you an overview of that argument. We think that North Capitol Street is unsafe, that it divides neighborhoods, that it's inequitable, and that it's unsustainable. Well, we're going to start with safety. North Capitol Street is incredibly unsafe. It's only been 1 month since the most recent violent crash on the corridor. A witness of an August 15th crash at North Capitol and Bryant Street said, "We live just down the block and watch people drag race through the North Cap Tunnel under Rhode Island every day, often continuing at ultra high speeds past Bryant. Nothing is ever done about it." North Capitol Street is one of the most dangerous corridors in the city. This is a map that is created by DDOT. And the darker sort of pink areas denote places where there are higher incidents of fatal or dangerous crashes. And each of those hearts on the map represents a life that's been lost. This data goes back to 2017. Each one of those hearts represents a person whose life was cut short, and a family that lost them, and a community that lost them. And we want to acknowledge, the devastating impact that can have on families and communities. And sadly, this doesn't relate directly to North Capitol Street, but 2 days ago, we lost a 5-year-old, Allison Hart, to traffic violence in Brooklyn. And we're thinking of her and her family this evening as well. I want to focus a little bit on where these crashes are happening. And if you look a little closer at that heat map, you'll see that a lot of the dangerous crashes on the north side of the corridor are happening at either end of the underpass. That matches the views of that witness, that people are racing, a lot of the dangers are coming from people racing through these underpasses. On the right of the screen, you'll see the lower half of the corridor. And there also we see crashes concentrated, above that south underpass, as well as at some very big intersections at New York Avenue and also at H Street. We think this traffic violence is unacceptable, and making the corridor safer for everybody has to be our top priority. Moving along, we also want to talk about how North Capitol Street divides communities. The underpasses cut off a lot of local roads that go east and west. The north underpass at 5 different points and the south underpass at 3 different points. This is what they look like at street level. We're all familiar with this. Instead of being able to cross directly, a pedestrian will have to go down the block and around. The limited number of these at-grade 4-way intersections creates a lot of choke points in the corridor, and that funnels pedestrians and cars and cyclists into these very constrained spaces, and those are really dangerous. So we'll move along. We also want to talk about how the corridor is inequitable. And we want to start with the fact that North Capitol Street puts the needs of drivers over everyone else, even though only 31% of neighboring residents drive to work. The vast majority, about 61%, rely on other means, whether it's transit, walking, or biking. At the same time, bus service on North Capitol Street is failing. 30% of Route 80 buses are late, and the average delay of that bus is 14 minutes. The speed that buses travel along this corridor is slower than a scooter or a bicycle travels. The reason that matters is that bus service is one of the most important things we should be looking to improve if we care about transportation equity. This chart on the right compares the population of bus riders in our area to the population overall. And you'll see that bus riders are more likely to be low income, more likely not to own a car, more likely to be a person of color. And it's that community that we think is really deserving of a fast and reliable commute, not to mention other ways to get around for other things. North Capitol Street is also inequitable because it's inaccessible. If you're a pedestrian who uses wheelchairs or strollers, this is a very regular sight along the corridor. It's a place that's very, very hard for you to pass. We also want to talk about how North Capitol Street is unsustainable. And that starts with the fact that it's congested. There's no more room for cars, and it's already at capacity. We're expecting thousands more residents to move to the corridor in the next decade as more and more buildings come online. It's not just about the congestion, though, it's about pollution. And that pollution harms residents along the corridor, especially those people who live within 500 meters of North Capitol Street. The source of that pollution is cars. And if we want to address pollution, we need to be encouraging people to walk, to ride the bus, or to use a bike to get around. And the next slide shows that it compares different modes of transit based on the emissions that they produce. You'll see that cars are at the bottom of the list because they are the worst. Walking, biking, riding the bus are at the top because they are the most sustainable forms of transportation. On the next slide, when we're talking about the space that we have, we also, we need to think about how many people we can move through a space, rather than how many vehicles we can. And on the right, you'll see that DDOT has sort of laid out how many people you can expect to move through a part of a street, depending on what mode they're traveling in. A sidewalk can move 9,000 people per hour. A dedicated transit lane or a bus lane can move 4,000 to 8,000 people per hour. A bike lane can move 7,500 people per hour, but a car lane can only move 600 to 1,600 people per hour. So when we look at North Capitol Street, we see a lot of space that we could use more efficiently. I'm going to turn it over to Nick to talk about our vision for the corridor.
Thank you, Connor. So the kind of solution that we're proposing really is a framework to start. It's not a hard and fast idea. It's more of a conceptual framework, like I said, that we can work in that we think addresses each of those points that we talked about. We're kind of proposing something, what we're calling more of a community boulevard that reflects more of a complete streets approach. This is kind of an example of the kind of thing that it might be. The main distinction here is obviously that to slow traffic at speeds and to reduce the amount of car trips that come on this corridor, it would require taking some drive lanes out of the picture and repurposing that space to give it back to the other modes in here. So we've got obviously a protected bike lane, or excuse me, protected bike lanes on either side, a bus lane in kind of a transit corridor format, and then expanded sidewalk space as well. You can see kind of the breakout here along those things. So we're going to talk about a little bit about each of these elements and how they help. As Connor talked about, this is really about kind of math and geometry and efficiency. The current status of the road is only able to move so many people, and we have a lot more coming. So our only options are either to watch it get worse and worse, or to change the types of way we move people around. And we think that building the infrastructure now for the future and creating the type of street and infrastructure that will make it easy to use these other modes is the key. We're not going to get a metro stop on North Capitol anytime soon. It's not in even the new talking plans of those things. A rapid busway where the buses come at regular intervals and are very quick down the corridor and get you to your place on time with regularity. That's as close as we can kind of get to a metro. And it shows in the data. Whenever you build that kind of reliable, frequent transit, people are very eager to use it. And folks who move here are much less likely to bring a car. Even the folks who are here may realize that they don't need their car for as many trips or even at all in some cases. So that's really the goal, is about providing alternatives so that the growth that we're going to see, and we already have, can actually solve the problems that we face from the limitations on the amount of space. We also think that traffic calming is going to be gained, as Connor said, by restoring those four-way intersections. As we talked about, the underpasses are a place where people really pick up speed, both going down and then coming up. by creating much less opportunity for them to gain momentum and speed, having to interface with stop signs and lights at a regular procession. That's one of the ways that you can kind of reduce some of the most dangerous speeding behavior that we see. In terms of expanding the space back to the community, we think that the expanded sidewalks and kind of park space that this brings out is a real win. Here on the left, obviously, is some of the present condition in front of the St. Martin's, for example, in front of some of the businesses. And on the right, I have some examples from other places in the city. This over in Georgetown in particular, they, even before the pandemic, were situationally on the weekends expanding their sidewalk space because so many pedestrians really squeezed in there, and it really made for a much more pleasant experience that helped revitalize the commercial businesses there, that helped make it a destination for folks, and also just provide more comfort to folks. During the pandemic, obviously, as a number of neighborhoods did, they also expanded to provide outdoor dining opportunities, and they've liked them so much that they're trying to make them permanent. We think that North Capitol businesses deserve the same kind of opportunities to really create livable spaces that people want to visit instead of the kind of crowded right next to a highway space that we have now. The other thing that we can do with those space, particularly in the non-commercial parts, is we can make those into more park space spread throughout the corridor. So, you can have a lot more green space for people to enjoy as part of their just daily lives and walking. And that can be on the north side, even in the areas we're talking about where the underpasses are currently, on the south side as well, where we don't currently have as much park space or green space really anywhere compared to the north side in particular. Here's kind of an example of how you can take that space and really create a really expanded sidewalk and kind of park mentality and opportunity here. And here's my version of Photoshop, MS Paint for life, outside the apartments down right near New York Avenue there. You could imagine taking that, what is a service lane now, and really creating some green space next to that bus lane, and a much kind of more attractive option for folks. The other thing that's useful about the solution is that it's really modular, as I said. When we're talking about redistributing space, we can make some choices. And we think that the community really should be engaged in this process of what they want to see with that space and what are the priorities on it. So, for instance, you could go even wider on your sidewalk spaces if bike lanes aren't a great fit for this corridor. And if that fourth traffic lane merely makes a big difference, you could also add that back in and keep some of the other prominent things like the bus lane. So there's opportunities to kind of work through this. And I think part of what we're hoping the DDOT planning process will be, we're really hearing from the community about which parts of this they're most excited about and help suit everyone's needs. So this vision is consistent with what DDOT's doing other places in the city too. And we think it's time that Ward 5 gets some of that. So one precedent is down on K Street Northwest through the downtown area. What's currently 6 to 8 vehicle lanes with those very large service lanes, you might know if you've been there, is being turned into 4 vehicle lanes with a dedicated transit way and center running bike lanes in it. That's a very big project that's been on the city's priority list for a long time. And it's a good example of reducing some of those existing drive lanes to give other modes some space. Similarly, over in Pennsylvania Ave Southeast, the Capitol Hill neighborhood, 6 vehicle lanes with 2 parking lanes being shifted down to 4 vehicle lanes with 2 bus/parking lanes, depending on time of day. And those also have curbside protected lanes. So a similar reduction happening there for safety and livability. So obviously we're here with 2 different presentations and we think that we agree on so much, really. We are here because we're united in an understanding of some of the problems here. But obviously Connor and I, there's a point of divergence where we think our solution addresses things a little bit better. So I'm just going to lay out kind of what we see those are, but in a friendly way to our friends over here from the Deckover community, who we're really happy are here with us today as well, and have some wonderful ideas that we're happy you guys are going to get to see as well. We think the Deckover really includes a great vision to add a park to this area, but it's a little too narrow for the corridor, and it doesn't put safety at as the top thing that we're trying to solve, and would potentially limit our options for the future. So in terms of kind of the scope of the corridor here, we think that we're really talking about this Massachusetts to Michigan area, where, as you saw on Connor's map, the crashes are happening, where the deaths are happening, and that the Deckover helps address some blocks of that in some ways. But really doesn't speak much to the rest of the corridor in as substantial a way as we think we can be. We think that it also locks in some of those unsafe conditions. We talked about why we think the underpasses really exacerbate the speeding and danger of the block, and decking over on the one and leaving the other completely as well. We think kind of leaves some of those and locks that in a way where we really could be thinking bigger in this case. We also think that park space is an amazing thing that we should be adding more of, but we do think that this block of the whole corridor is not quite the place that is in most need of it. We know that, Harry Thomas Rec and Crispus Attucks are great parks. They certainly don't meet every need of everyone in the community. There's always room for more, but we do think that there's opportunity to look a little bit elsewhere in the corridor where we could bring some park space and make it even more kind of distributed across the corridor. So the other thing as we think about kind of why we're pushing for a little bit more is that, these really are moments that only come around once in a generation. The level of budget, attention, and generally political will, it's rare that, one street's going to get changes kind of twice in a row. So we think as long as we're here at the outset, it's really incumbent on us to really ask for the thing that will make the biggest difference and fix all the problems together. So our kind of idea here is really to merge the best of both worlds. We think that we can add a signature park that is very much in line with what the kind of space the Deckover is offering to bring to the community into the community boulevard vision. And we actually think there's an amazing place for it that's already been kind of identified in the past. So this is Lincoln Road looking southbound, Lincoln and North Cap, where those two kind of veer off and connect together at Florida. There's already kind of two very small little pocket parks here. Might think of this as the place where the flea market often puts some of their wares. This is a space that was identified in the 2013 Mideast Livability Study by DDOT. It's this blue space on the right here that they already recommended for safety reasons that we should be closing off this cut-through lane, basically. If you're familiar with this area, what often happens is drivers coming north on North Capitol see the opportunity to get onto maybe a lesser trafficked Lincoln and use their North Capitol speed and really hit Lincoln really hard. I lived right between Lincoln and North Capitol. I watch that all the time, and it's really a dangerous place where North Capitol traffic veers off into these cut-throughs. So it's already a place that's really a good opportunity to close and reduce some dangerous behavior, and that actually will provide a lot of space. In fact, more space than even DDOT identified in 2013. What we actually have here in terms of public right-of-way is a significant amount of space because you'll actually notice this kind of semicircular shape here at the right end, so that we've turned the map 90 degrees here. This is what used to be the old Truxton Circle, where the neighborhood gets its name from. So that right-of-way actually covers kind of all the way through that Q Street intersection. And so we've kind of got this long, semi-narrow, but actually quite wide at the bottom space that we think can be equivalently an equivalent opportunity to add a great park. This is just some of the ideas that we've talked about, or that in terms of segmenting the space in the same way the Deckover has really done a much better job, I'll say, in thinking through the vision of the park itself. This is a very early intro idea on that. And also we think there's some options for connectivity here. So the blue represent opportunity to do similar to the way the Deckover offers what's called a WUNRF, which is when the pedestrian level, the sidewalk, and the street are basically at the same level and usually done with the same material. Often it's brick pavers of some sort. It's the kind of thing, if you've been down to the waterfront, the Southwest waterfront, it's down there. It really communicates to drivers, this is a different kind of space. This is a pedestrian first space, and I need to be slower, and I'm kind of on unfamiliar territory. So we think we could offer similarly if we need to keep connectivity here through Quincy and up to R and through the alley there, that kind of opportunity. But also if the community felt really strongly, this could be entirely parked and just have the traffic go out the other side. Again, I think that's something that the community would want to talk a lot about in a proposal like this. There also is this kind of bonus space that's across the street here, which is what is now the slip lane, another kind of dangerous element of the redesign, and that kind of little park that's triangled off with no particular use case. We think that there's some opportunity to incorporate that into either more activated space usable, or even just kind of more monumental and green space and visuals, depending on kind of the uses. That space would probably speak a little bit more to whatever happens in the building on the what's called the Joe Mamo lot, the empty lot there. but that's more kind of space as part of this. And in terms of kind of total size, we think that this is a real opportunity to add a very similar amount of space as what the Deckover is proposing. There's by an unofficial measurement here, that is, we use the same scale on these maps and use the tools. We think we're talking in the same ballpark of 30 to 40,000 square feet here for each case. So we see this as kind of a great way to essentially add that space either way, and do it without locking in the underpasses. The other thing that you might have noticed in the slide is a mention of restoring the Trucks and Circle fountain. This is actually something that the community lost when Trucks and Circle was kind of bulldozed away. And apparently the fountain has been lying rotting away in a national park in Maryland. And so it's still there. I don't know the use it's in, obviously. This is a little bit of an optimistic idea. But I do think that I've been inspired a lot by what the Deckover folks have brought around using the park to really tell the story of the neighborhoods and some of that history. And I think that this is something that could be incorporated in a way that might be really special and really mark this space and restore, again, something that was lost from the community. So kind of just to summarize, we think that Community Boulevard is the right long-term vision here for North Capitol Street. This is going to make the corridor safer, help reconnect the neighborhoods, really improve transportation equity and sustainability, and help us add a lot more park space throughout the corridor, including that kind of signature park, hopefully at that location. In terms of some of the logistics, we know this is a big project. We know this is a big vision. There's a lot of funding options that are all going to be part of the conversation. The first is that DC capital budget funds regularly attack projects like this. That K Street project I mentioned to you, $116 million in the budget for that. The Douglas Bridge, which just got completed by DDOT, just opened last weekend, $400 million project. So the district has made big capital projects for streetscape redesign a priority in other parts of the city. And we think North Capitol is a particularly needing and deserving one. The other kind of funding source that's been new to the city this year is it was in the budget this year, a kind of designation that any revenue that comes out of some of the new traffic cameras needs to be dedicated and directly fund safety improvements, street safety improvements. We think this is the kind of project that would be really eligible for that and should be a focus of that. The other aspect we talked about, there's a number of various housing projects coming along the corridor. We think that it's always ideal when a community has a kind of wish list of things that they want to have accomplished, if there's going to be any community benefit agreements that are happening, if there's going to be any planned unit developments that come with those, and being able to say to a developer that, hey, the thing we're going to want from you is you to fix up this portion of the street in front of your building or nearby. This is where we need you to put that funds that are being designated for the community as part of this project. And of course, the biggest one here is that this is a national conversation right now. Urban renewal highways that bulldoze through communities and left their stain on our cities are finally being re-examined. And the Biden administration in particular has been talking the talk so far about how we need to undo those. And there is varying amounts of money depending on which week we're in of the bipartisan infrastructure deal, but amounts of money dedicated here to highway removal and reconnecting communities. And we think that this is the kind of project that would be very much trying to apply for those kinds of funds. The other thing we want to flag is just in terms of timing, this would be very likely to be sequenced in some way, right? There's a long project in a lot of ways, but there's a number of steps that could happen kind of in the interim. So painting bus lanes, installing those has been something DDOT's been able to do a little bit quicker in some areas of the city. And that could be probably a short-term thing that could happen on the earlier side. Building that signature park certainly is not dependent upon the entire thing happening right away. So we think that there's opportunity for potentially that to be sequenced in there. And then obviously the coming to grade would be probably one of the larger portions of the construction. And then kind of installing obviously the full streetscape redesign. So this probably, again, we're not DDOT, we're not the planners or those folks, but our expectation would be there would probably be some level of stages to this. So our kind of pitch for the proposal, going through the things that we talked about, here you can see why we think the compromise really maxes out all of the things that we're talking about here. And is something that we hope that DDOT will be interested in engaging in, and hope you'll bring great questions and ideas to make it even better. Again, if you want to get in touch with us, I think Connor and I put our information in the chat. You can see that again here. We also, if you want to sign up for the newsletter, essentially, where we can keep you updated, if you go to ward5forall.org/NorthCap, there's a little sign up form there, and we can certainly keep you abreast. Great, I think we might be on time.
You're a little early. You're actually
All right.
3 minutes early there. I'm going to thank you for that presentation. I'm going to turn it over. We are about 3 minutes ahead of time, which is good. I'll turn it over now to the North Capitol Deckover, which will get an equal 30 minutes. And then for all of those who have joined us, we'll be reserving the last 25 or 30 minutes for questions. I see one question in the Q&A box right now. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will get to them after the North Capitol Deckover presentation. Questions for both panels. North Capitol Deckover, if you're ready to present, I think we're ready to go.
All right, just wanted to double check and make sure that everyone can see the presentation. Just a thumbs up, that'd be great. Awesome, thank you very much. So thank you to the Eckington Civic Association and as well to Nick Sementelli and Conor Shaw for giving us this opportunity to speak on behalf of the North Capitol Deckover and the Streetscape Initiative. My name is Thaddeus Thaler, and I'm a resident of Bloomingdale. I actually live right on North Capitol, overlooking the underpass. In addition to myself, our panel is also joined by Mark Galvan, who is a resident of Eckington and is the vice president of the Eckington Parks and Arts Association, as well the Bloomingdale Civic Association president, Teri Janine Quin, and the ANC 5E representative, Bertha Holliday. What we want to talk about here today is the alternative vision from what was just presented a moment ago, and we like to think it's the one that's been around a little bit longer. But to start off, the approach that we have for the North Capitol Deckover to create a park over the Rhode Island underpass, I know my colleagues would be appreciative if we talked a little bit about the history in a similar way that was just described earlier. But I think a good way to demonstrate that is through a video here that was presented by Vox a couple of years ago to describe the history of highways in the nation. And in particular, I would like you to listen to 2 mentions of Washington, D.C. So without further ado, I will get this video started.
It's hard to picture American cities without the highways running through their core. But highway removal projects like this one in Boston can give us a sense of how disruptive it was when the U.S. built huge highways through the cities after World War II.
These new highways will have a far-reaching economic impact on the entire nation.
That was definitely true. Highways revolutionized the way we transport goods. But inside cities, they demolished and isolated entire neighborhoods. They gave wealthy taxpayers a way out of the city and gave air pollution and traffic noise a way in. And they redesigned urban life around the car. Now 85% of Americans drive to work every day. So why did American cities agree to build highways that were bad for cities?
It's a really interesting question, and part of it actually goes all the way back to the 1930s, when a group of auto interests, such as General Motors, AAA, formed something called the National Highway Users Conference.
They began lobbying for taxes that would help fund highway construction. General Motors started to design what a new highway system could look like, and they displayed that vision at the 1939 World's Fair with Futurama, an exhibit featuring expressways that not only connected cities, but ran right through them. It was a design that allowed for more cars and less congestion. By 1955, the Department of Commerce echoed GM's vision with something called the Yellow Book. It laid out all the routes that interstates would take throughout the country under Eisenhower's Federal Highway Act of 1956, which funded the national highway system.
A lot of it's logical. It's, connecting most of the U.S.'s major cities. But the really interesting thing is you also have highways slicing right through the downtowns of many of these cities. Pretty much every major city in the country, New York, D.C., San Francisco, Philadelphia, you have major highways cutting through neighborhoods, requiring the demolition of lots of housing and other sorts of buildings.
That's largely because some of the key contributors to the plan were auto industry members developers, but no urban planners.
And that's because the profession barely even existed at the time. Nowadays, there's a value placed on preserving neighborhoods, on keeping cities intact, and that concept just really didn't even exist in the 40s and 50s. When people were talking about connecting the country with highways, it seemed pretty natural just to drive highways through the center of cities as well.
Local municipalities were particularly eager to build highways under this plan because 90% of funding came from the federal government and the other 10% from states.
There's also a darker side to the reason why all these planners wanted to build highways through downtowns and urban neighborhoods.
Highways not only paved the way for more and more white people to move into homogeneous suburbs, they also provided cover for targeted demolitions inside the city.
During that era, federal policies and implicit priorities of planners dictated that you had, vibrant, dense downtown neighborhoods filled mostly with African-American residents. Instead of being preserved under the plan, they were slated as targets for removal. They were considered blight, and an easy way of getting rid of that blight was by demolishing them and paving a highway through it.
Neighborhoods and streetcars were pushed aside to make way for the automobile.
Look at the neighborhoods of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley in Detroit.
When you go back to the 30s and 40s, these are thriving, dense neighborhoods filled with hundreds of thousands of residents, of businesses. And if you go back today, they're mostly just empty grass plots.
This wasn't just a historical accident. It became a pattern in cities across the country. Poor and minority residents were displaced to make way for highways, and white residents used those highways to commute into the city for jobs and commute back home at night.
The only exception to this pattern is in places where highways were slated to go through wealthy neighborhoods.
There were actually proposals to put a highway through Northwest DC and through Greenwich Village in Manhattan. But you can guess what happened there.
Anywhere where residents had the means to organize and protest, they were often able to stop the highways from being built. Whereas in places where residents didn't have the political capital and other sorts of privileges that allow you to do that, their neighborhoods ended up being demolished, and they're now highways today.
But it's hard to pick.
So to that vein, we wanted to talk a little bit about the history as has occurred in North Capitol Street. And that was an example of where in Georgetown, and that Northwest reference that was made in the video, it didn't happen down Wisconsin Avenue. No, it happened on North Capitol Street. And actually the work of the expansion and the widening of North Capitol Street finished up in 1963, just several years after the National Highway Act was passed back in 1956. And this was indicative of a gradual eastward movement of shifting the dividing line between white neighborhoods and Black neighborhoods. It originally was west of First Street, it moved eastward to First, and then finally settled on North Capitol Street. To give you a sense of the area of focus that we're looking at, the green marking here is demonstrative of where the Deckover would occur. You see Rhode Island Avenue running there from the left side up to the northeast side. As well, the point of interest that I want to show here is that we've illustrated a yellow line outlining a streetscape initiative idea that encompasses Eckington up to Lincoln Road, as well over to First Street for Bloomingdale. We see this as something that's part and parcel to the Deckover itself, is improving the streetscape, whether it is a question of safety or aesthetics. The distinguishing factor that we have found between the two competing ideas of bringing North Capitol Street to grade versus providing a deck over is the question of reuniting communities versus just purely focusing on transit, which by and large comes from out of state, from Maryland drivers. If you ever stand over the underpass, you'll see the number of Maryland plates coming through. The importance of reconnecting communities that were divided by this national highway of North Capitol Street to rectify the infrastructure wrongs and to create a safe place for people to cross is the way that we have envisioned a Deckover space and a park overall. On top of that, you have aspects of pollution, which would be covered up. You would have noise, which would be covered up and reduced and essentially eliminated by capping over this existing space. To give you a little bit of a better sense of what this could look like, here's a bird's eye view on the left of the present condition versus what could potentially be the future. Again, in the same way that Nick made his point about this is very preliminary. These are ideas to get people thinking. And obviously with the engagement with DDOT, there are going to be many opportunities for all communities around here who are affected by this space to share and voice their opinions. But we wanted to give you a little bit of the sense of what this design could look like to reunite these two communities that were separated 60 years ago. Again, here's another viewpoint looking south from Rhode Island on the northwest side of North Capitol Street, there at the top, versus what could be, covering it over, providing lots of shade, additional trees, an area down the center for children to play, curbless streets off to the side there that run along St. Martin's Church. We've really upped our civic engagement this year in the post-pandemic era. Again, this has been an idea that has existed for a good 10 years at least. As you see there, we actually presented in front of the Eckington Civic Association way back in 2018. We've increased our civic and government engagement, as you can see here, and actually we'll be having an upcoming community forum on September 25th, but going all the way down the line from Councilwoman Che, Councilmember McDuffie, a variety of other government organizations, as well as civic associations that line North Capitol Street. So we really wanted to make sure that this was a community-led engagement and effort, and to get as many shared thoughts as were possible for surrounding associations and residents affected on North Capitol Street. When you talk about traffic coming through, this is my every morning when I look out my window. This is what I see, this is what I hear, this is what I smell. This is it. And not only myself, but another North Capitol Deckover Steering Committee member, Sandrine Bukersh, who lives in Eckington on that side of North Capitol. So this is what would be covered up essentially. Imagine not having that noise, not having that pollution emanating up, and as opposed to having it at grade level, basically bringing all this right up to surface level. This gives you another view of what could be. The way that this had been presented to us was the possibility of having several different areas. You could have a rest area, play area, gather area, vista area. It's very typical of urban planning to lay out parks in this manner. There's actually a Deckover, which we'll allude to, that's actually down in Dallas, which has been very successful, that also divides their section into different kind of reserved areas that are intended for particular uses. You see on the right side, the historic timeline that integrates in, which our counterparts had alluded to as well, the importance of history, the importance of uniting these two communities that were rent apart during the highwayization of North Capitol Street years ago. When we talk about safety, something that's important to consider here is a study that was done in 2017 by public health specialists from Columbia University in New York and the French School of Public Health in a very reputable journal here, the American Journal of Public Health, where they described in very scientific, economic Monte Carlo simulations, for those of you who are familiar with these statistical and economic devices, how savings were realized for 84% of those simulations. Ultimately, in a rapidly urbanizing world, reclaiming green space through deck parks can bring health benefits alongside economic savings over the long term. They produce an exceptional value when implemented over below grade. So when you're making assertions about things like this, it's important to take a look at the research that has been done to decide, okay, sure, you can make assertions, but at the same time, what is the science to back it up? What have the actual subject matter experts said about this? None of us on the North Capitol Deckover Committee assume that we ourselves are urban planners or transportation safety specialists. So that's why we rely on outside sources like this. For example, when we talk about traffic lights that could occur if you were to bring the underpass back up to grade, as we saw in the previous presentation, the way that it was described was that traffic lights are a traffic calming and safety measure, when actually that's not the case. So according to the US Federal Highway Administration, New York City Department of Transportation, actually authority on traffic calming, a professor at the University of Utah, traffic lights and stop signs really aren't designed to be speed control. It's all about traffic flow and efficiency. And actually, it ends up being counterproductive. And really, it's more about speed bumps, speed limit signs, traffic enforcement, because you end up getting greater speed as drivers accelerate to try to get through the signal before it turns red. We also like the idea, however, of the one-earth, which is essentially a curbless street. Here, there's an example actually over in Georgetown. And so the idea here is that you are bringing it to the same level, and there are visual cues that become much more significant for a driver than something that they can easily blow through, like a stoplight or a stop sign. These are becoming more and more popular, and there's actually a component where you integrate parking as kind of a natural barrier to separate the two areas. Essentially, the safety benefits of the curbless streets: you have increased interaction among all the modes of transportation, reduced vehicular speed, improved street geometry, reduced crash rates, and overall reduced crime rates. You have different ways to indicate that you're entering different areas as well. San Francisco is utilizing this as well. As the quote says down there, this is exactly the kind of street design that San Francisco needs more of to achieve the city's Vision Zero goal. So we could imagine having this sort of setup on the T Street Bridge. And of course, there's the environment. We all know about climate change. We all know about the heat issues that are happening. Well, a big component of that is the urban heat island effect, and that happens when you have a lot of concrete. So we feel like a counterpoint to the idea of bringing concrete up and higher is to cover it and make more green. We understand that there are other parks nearby, but at the same time, if we can reduce this urban heat island effect, all the better. You can see this distinction here. When you see the blue, that's where foliage is. Where you see the orange, that's where concrete and asphalt is. So there are a lot of different ways that their strategies can be used to reduce the urban heat, rain runoff, promote quality of life, shading, surface water, cool paving. And when we think about that, that's exactly what the Deckover would be doing. There are so many opportunities, from bioretention to a cistern for water collection and gray water use. Just a lot of opportunities to be able to go in the direction that really the world is going, as we recently joined the Paris Accords again, to improve the environment. And yes, we do concede that there are a number of parks around here, but something that's important is to be able to have this connectivity of connected networks of cool green areas. You could move swiftly from Crispus Attucks to the Deckover, on down the line, Harry Thomas, and all the way down to the Tanner Park as well. And this isn't a flash in the pan idea. This is something that has been around actually for around 40 years, since the first one was developed in Seattle and in Phoenix, Arizona. And the importance of this is that you're able to address urban inequalities and inefficiencies while at the same time putting large volumes of highway traffic underground. As I said, they're happening all over the country. For example, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the state senator Kevin Matthews, who founded and chaired the Tulsa Race Riot Centennial Commission, talks about how a park can draw people, and where people are drawn there in closer proximity to things that will educate them. That harkens to the history component that we're talking about with the Deckover. In North Vancouver, another 2-block long deck over the freeway to create a destination public park, with both of the east and west sides of the park connected by a pedestrian overpass. We think this idea of having a shared communal space where people can freely walk across instead of having to walk across 6-8 lanes of traffic, and traffic means bike lanes, as you have to wait for a bike to cross. It means bus lanes, as you have to wait for a bus to cross. So how does that work with the actual flow of pedestrians and the timing and movement when someone is going to be turning onto Seton, turning onto T, et cetera, from a boulevard? What sorts of difficulties arise as you increase intersections, which are prone for accidents? In Oak Cliff, Texas, the Southern Gateway Deck Park, it makes sense that we're going to get green space where there would otherwise be noise pollution and high-speed traffic, seen very much as a positive. Even going back to 2008, the city of New York took a look at this inventory of decking opportunities over transportation properties. They found 83 possible areas. And yes, some of them were over train tracks, but a good number of them were also over their highways. For example, the BQE, or the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. They looked at decking over the below grade highways to stitch neighborhoods back together and to create green infrastructure. I alluded to earlier the one in Dallas, and this one's been around for a while. So they've gotten the chance, as Bobby Abtahi says down here as the president of the Dallas Park and Recreation Board, it's kind of turned into a public square. It's really turned into a place where you see anyone and everyone. And that's That's the distinguishing quality of being able to have a Deckover park. You bring a place where people come together, where you reunite communities. And as we hear about that from that reconnecting of communities from the Biden administration, that's the direction we're going with a Deckover park. St. Louis has done it as well. They actually considered bringing the Boulevard up to grade, but decided actually that it wouldn't improve pedestrian or bike access as well as the park over the highway does. And that was over I-70. It's been very successful there as part of the National Park Service. But it's not only the United States. Germany has been at the forefront of this. And not only the Germans are recognizing it, but the Aussies are too. The Germans are putting a higher value on green space because they have higher densities and less room to expand. Sounds like DC. We have higher densities. We have less room to expand. So what do? They put a higher value on green space in the way that DC has been. A good example of this is in Hamburg. And actually they had a very specific focus when it comes to the one in Hamburg based on noise reduction. And the importance of this will be borne out here in this next video, which I'm actually going to mute and read the subtext because they're speaking in German, and I know it's difficult to just sit there and read subtitles here on a screen. So bear with me here. But before we get to that, I did want to mention this quote from the lead engineer on the Hamburg Deckel or Deckover project. Tunnels that completely enclose a road space can reduce noise emission, and that's not a typo, this is the effect of emission, in the neighboring residential areas to practically zero. The sound waves emitted by vehicles cannot penetrate solid concrete walls and soil backfill. Okay, so get your listening ears on. I'm going to try to read this in the most mellifluous and artistic voice I can. For the first time since 10 years, I can now once again sleep with the window open and enjoy my nighttime peace. In summer, I'm better able to use my small oasis, the balcony, where I can sit and watch films on my laptop, which I previously couldn't do because I couldn't understand what was being said. I can listen to music without turning the sound up to full volume. I am now certainly a lot happier than before with my living situation. I definitely believe that it's increased in value. We also talked about this with the neighbors. Yes, precisely, because it is simply quieter. Since a month, the hens have been regularly laying eggs, but not yet all of them. My neighbors say it's like a wellness oasis for them. Hence, after the installation of the cover, you no longer hear any noise. It's really quiet. Helicopters no longer circle above when the highway is gridlocked. That is really great. Another example is in Maastricht, in the Netherlands. On the left side, you can see actually what those girders would look like in the creation of a Deckover project. And in the lower right picture, you see what the end result is. This one's particularly interesting because they ended up doing a double-decker version of an underpass to allow for international vehicles on one level, and then on another level, regional vehicles to go through, since it is an international highway. And this video I will play with sound. This is about that particular Deckover in Maastricht.
The A2, a highway helping to connect the Netherlands with its neighbors, allows a free flow of traffic between countries, except for one major spot, Maastricht. Here, the stream of cars hits a bottleneck, facing a 50-kilometer speed limit and a series of unwelcome traffic lights.
You see the highway running to the heart of the city in a residential area, and that's very bad because there's a lot of traffic on the highway and thousands of children to go to school and pass a highway in the middle of the city. It's crazy.
So the city hatched a plan to help bring some sanity to the chaos.
He came up with this plan, a double stack tunnel, which gives even more capacity for the traffic than any forecast predicted. You can build it in a very small area, which gives more opportunity for real estate development on top.
Around 80% of the traffic flow will be redirected underground to the 2.3-kilometer double-decker tunnel. Regional and local traffic will use the up level, and through traffic will use the lower one. It will allow vehicles to travel 80 to 100 kilometers per hour, keeping up with highway speeds. The thought is that with the highway hidden below, new opportunities for life above will emerge.
The nice thing about our plan is that we not only make a solution for the traffic, for the cars, but that we make a better Maastricht East, that we connect the neighborhoods, and that we make it attractive again.
What will be known as the green. The 8.
So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what this space looks like. And I will encourage you when we post the video that and the presentation that you'll get a chance to take a look at that secondary video, which actually shows what the end result of the deck over there in Maastricht looks like. When we talk about the history of the work that's been done, some of this has really been about the involvement of the DC government. This has been in the plans for a while, and no more illustrative of that is the fact that in the recently enacted DC Comprehensive Plan Amendment of 2021, there are two particular areas that are singled out. One connecting Bloomingdale and Eckington. And here we have a discussion of improving the connectivity between our two neighborhoods to deck over the entire expanse, to create a tunnel and create a green space to make crossing North Capitol Street more inviting. The second direct quote from the DC Comprehensive Plan has to do with podium parks, which again here addresses the underpasses of North Capitol Street there on that final line. So, you know, as I mentioned, there's some history to this. It goes back to 2014 when the proposition of putting a deck over was included in the Mid-City East Small Area Plan, as well as the Mid-City East Livability Study. And the last point that we want to make here, and I know this is something that Connor and Nick have alluded to as well, the really exciting thing here that I think everyone's on board with is there's money. There's $1 million that's been included in the DC budget for FY22. And as the mayor had put it in her narrative when she submitted this, was to conduct a feasibility study for a potential Deckover project. And so thanks to a number of people who not only submitted written testimony from the various communities that we have, but also a number of people from our Deckover steering committee who presented oral testimony. And I know Connor and Nick did as well. So always encourage as much civic engagement as possible. But the end result here is that things are moving forward. And I think that's a big thing that all of us can agree on is the importance of improving North Capitol Street. As you've seen, there are two very kind of differing opinions of the way to go about that in particular areas. But the thing that we have kind of embraced as a Deckover community is making sure that, yes, we do have an appreciation for improving all of North Capitol Street, but at the same time, knowing that we need to get the input from other civic associations and other communities, because those are the areas that are impacting them directly. This is an area that directly impacts us in Bloomingdale and yourselves in Eckington. So I thank you for your time and attention here. And again, we'd be happy to have you follow us on Instagram and Twitter, as well as check out our website as well. There's that typical plug that you get at the end of these presentations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Thad. We're 4 minutes ahead of time here, so we'll begin the final part of our presentation tonight. It is 8 o'clock exactly, perfect timing here. Those of you who can see the Q&A, I think I should go through these out of fairness to the people who entered these things in chronological order. Some of these, I would like to offer them to both the presenter groups here, although it may be obvious that some of these questions, comments address one or the other. The first one is 727. Can you speak to how to increase Americans with Disability Act compliance along the entire corridor in terms of sidewalk width and curb cutouts? I think I'd like to hear Nick or Connor address that. This was a question that was posed during your presentation, but then if you've got anything to say, and then I'll see if the Deckover folks have anything on that.
Sure, and thank you for the question, Kaya. We think pedestrian inaccessibility is one of the major problems on the corridor. And our plan, by taking some space that's currently used for drivers and giving that to pedestrians to give them accessible, wider sidewalks all the way from Massachusetts Avenue to Michigan Avenue is a real solution and would allow for ADA compliance. And along with that, you know, any new installation, we would want to see crosswalks that are ADA compliant and have the appropriate sort of rumble strips on the ground, and also the sort of speaking crosswalk terminals that you see in newer intersections throughout the city.
Deckover, any response to that? I think it was looking addressing the entire corridor length, which of course DDOT said they would do. But Deckover, do you have any response or to that question there? The same one, the ADA compliance?
Yeah, I can answer that, at least with respect to the streetscape areas that we're talking about. You know, there are certainly options to be able to, you know, widen the sidewalks. In some of those areas, even the local traffic lanes are pretty significantly wide. And really what we're looking for is, you know, 3 to 4 feet worth of width. But obviously all of those sidewalks would need to be replaced. In the Deckover area, it would, you know, especially with less ramps up and down and having a level plane surface, certainly makes it more accessible. But you would need to do sidewalk improvements to allow for the residents adjacent to that space to make accessible as well. So there are certainly options, and obviously we would, you know, work and defer to DDOT to assist with making some of those recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I think for both sides would agree that any and all of us who have talked to DDOT about this, ADA compliance is very high on their list. And DDOT will just start on October 1st. They'll start looking at the traffic on the entire traffic and safety on the entire corridor. Next one is 7:30 exactly. It's a comment, but immediately followed by a question. Love this vision for our neighborhood, and it's obviously talking about the Boulevard, the local corridor. The Boulevard vision is so brilliant; it would make my commute from Bloomingdale to Chinatown so much easier, safer, and more pleasant. But then another immediately after that, I would really like to see protected bus lanes and protected bike lanes on North Capitol Street. You wanted to the Boulevard folks? Do you want to address that? Is there any comment you've got in response to that?
We would love to see them too. We think bus lanes in particular are the most important improvement we can make for equity because so many residents on the corridor rely on bus service to get around.
Deckover, is any isn't really a question, but any response from you to that? Protected bus lanes and protected bike lanes.
So I think that we recognize that both of those are certainly important to lots of folks in this conversation and to DDOT as well. My current understanding is that North Capitol Street isn't kind of envisioned as being a place where you would put a bike lane. DDOT may be changing on that, I don't know. But I think as we go along with this project and continue our conversations with both the community as well as the DDOT and planning and everyone else who's going to be involved in this, those are parts of those are just some of the considerations that will come into play. And I think both sides, both plans will have to be somewhat flexible as we move forward, because certainly I think neither of these plans is going to answer every single thing that everyone wants to see. And so there's going to have to be some flexibility. We understand that, and we're open to it. And we're open to continuing the conversation about how we incorporate the best traffic options for all the ways that we all use the street into the plan. But, you know, I think the honest answer is no one has all the answers right now. We're going to have to be flexible and work with the community and the agencies as well.
Thank you. There's a next one is a comment here about the old Truxton Circle fountain here. Then be so cool to bring back the circle and the fountain to our neighborhood. Let me pose this as a question in search of an answer to both teams. Does someone know where this is from? Anonymous attendee. Is there something that either of the groups could put in the chat there about where this person could learn more about the original Truxton Circle fountain and the circle itself? If you've got it, maybe put it in the chat. We've got somebody here who's interested in that fountain and its history.
Sure, we have a link to an article that we can provide.
Put it in the chat there. That would be very helpful, I think. Next, followed immediately by address to the Deckover presentation. Can you explain how this, apparently referring to the Deckover project itself, how this would reduce pollution in the neighborhood? Wouldn't it just funnel out the pollution to the end to somewhere else? this addressed specifically to the Deckover presentation?
So yeah, I can answer that question. So you know, the major pollution that would be reduced here, we're talking about is noise pollution. Obviously, a larger green space that is there would, you know, help absorb you know, pollutants to some degree, but I believe we're mostly talking about noise pollution. As that's correct, the air, you know, cars going through would come in and out the same side. So
I think the one difference though is that if you live right along that stretch right now, you're experiencing the air pollution directly every time you walk out the front of your house. And that for those people who live right along that stretch would be eliminated. It's not to say it won't go somewhere else, but it won't be in front of your house, and perhaps it won't be in front of a residential area, depending on, you know, how things work out.
Yeah, to fairness, that was from the response to the Deckover. Any response from the Boulevard side to that question?
Sure. I mean, I think this is a major point of distinction between our proposals. We explained that, you know, we're trying to lay out a vision for the entire corridor from Massachusetts to Michigan Avenue, including solutions that will reduce reliance on cars as a form of transportation throughout that entire corridor. And we think that is something that will address noise pollution and air pollution for residents of all blocks of this stretch of North Capitol Street, not just the 1900 block.
Okay, thank you. The next one is apparently addressed to the Deckover presentation because it refers to the Vox video. The Vox video seemed to support dismantling highways, but this, apparently referring to the Deckover project, keeps the highways intact. How does this proposal, the Deckover proposal, address the concerns raised in the video? It's apparently addressed to the Deckover.
I would say in terms of the dismantling of highways, yes, there is a manner to dismantle highways, but I think the other component to consider is different ways to consider the reduced usage of a highway situation, and one of those is to cap over those existing spaces. The other idea that we had considered and would not discount would be the possibility of extending the Deckover. There's no reason why this couldn't be extended possibly all the way down to New York Avenue, where there's another underpass. So if you were able to put everything underground and allow to have that free flow of traffic to continue to be completely separated from the residential living space, that would be a big boon and would really eliminate the highway itself. So that's another consideration to keep in mind.
Is there the Boulevard side have any response to that same question about dismantling the highways? But
yeah, I'd say that I think that lays out the kind of rank order somewhat. That I think that decking over what we have is better than the status quo in so many ways, and but that the true goal, as I think the video laid out, is dismantling the highways in the first place. And I think that our vision represents dismantling and really making this no longer a highway at all. I also think that building everything underground would essentially be building a larger highway, which would only induce more car trips, create more problems for the region as a whole. So that's where I would say why we think we should start and aim for what we think is the best solution, which is to eliminate the idea of a highway in a neighborhood rather than just to try to mitigate the impact of it.
did I hear another panelist attempting to speak in his response to that question here? I think I heard a female voice.
Yeah, that was me, but I'll let Bertha go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it is important to first of all recognize that North Capitol is primarily used by commuters. And I'm not sure how much the district can amend or change commuters' behavior, out-of-state people. So I think, I think that basic reality has to be addressed, that these are not local people who are primarily on North Capitol. They're primarily people from Maryland, commuting in and commuting out.
Teri, did you have something you want?
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, I've heard a number of times this evening this idea that the other plan is really considering the entire corridor, and we're very much limited to this small space. And I wanted to speak to that because I want to be super clear. It's not that we don't care about the entire corridor or how this meshes with the rest of the corridor. We care about that very much. However, the perspective that we have taken is that it is important to really engage the people who are most impacted by these changes directly in the planning process from the very beginning. And so to us, it did not feel appropriate to roll out a whole plan from end to end without engaging those people who live closest and are most impacted along those other stretches. So we thought, let's start right here at home. We're right here, right in the area that touches right where we live. Let's discuss that. And in the course of that discussion, we have certainly opened it up and we have an open invitation to folks from other parts of the corridor to participate and to hopefully, if they haven't already, begun to envision what the rest of the corridor could look like, and especially the sections that touch them directly. That's something that we want to invite them to do with us.
Thank you. There's something I'd like to just drop as a comment using the prerogative of the moderator here, that it's an interesting question to me that starting October 1st, the District of Columbia's DDOT will start using this money for the traffic study, and something that I hope will come up early as we engage, and by we, I mean we who live in the community with the DDOT folks, is do they have an answer to the question of what percentage of that traffic down North Capitol Street is commuters that are coming in from Maryland? If they have any idea what the fractions are, what percentage of these people are local versus long distance, that's something that they might be able to find out. I don't know, but I hope we can ask if there's a way to include that in the thinking. The next question here is addressed specifically to the community boulevard. It doesn't look like your proposal includes parking space. How do you think the loss of parking will affect the area? This is addressed to the boulevard.
Yeah, so I think that the way we're thinking about it is that, transforming the space means maximizing the space to serve the broadest number of people. And we talked about kind of efficiencies in those drive lanes versus bus lanes, et cetera. A lane that exclusively stores a vehicle that's not moving at all is kind of the least valuable use on the major corridor like that. So broadly speaking, we think that a full-time parking on North Capitol, which is not something we have right now already, those are pretty much rush hour restricted along almost all the corridor, is not something that probably makes sense if we're trying to get the highest use of that space. So we do think that each community along the corridor will have to give up a handful of those part-time parking spaces. But what we do think when we're talking about here is reducing the need to use cars on this corridor at all. And that if we're successful in that by building a much better alternative, that reduces the demand for those spaces at the same time, right? We can't have all the new residents coming in to the new homes that they are bringing their cars. There will be a parking crisis bigger than we have now. We need them to come and decide that they don't need a car. And so if we're going to make it better, not worse in the future for a parking situation for all neighbors, we need alternatives that are real and reliable for folks.
That's thank you. Apparently that was a question inspired by looking at the whole corridor that the community boulevard presented there. But the Deckover side, do you have a response of any kind you could present to that?
I have several responses. One of the things that has always kind of bothered me about the community boulevard concept is that it is ahistorical, I believe, does not pay attention to history, and it does not pay attention to context, okay? So you end up with this notion of one size fits all communities. The Deckover is proposed for a residential community, okay? And we are of the mind that the needs of a residential community related to green space and how the green space is used, how the sidewalks are used, et cetera, are different from those of, say, south of New York, where you start getting into the mixed use, commercial type of situation. And I think these issues of history and context are very important in terms of quality of life. I also think that they're very important in terms of our recognizing the varying lifestyles that people have. Okay. If you're single, you know, you can make it with a bike. I guess. I don't know. But I guess you could go through life, you know, you can make it with a bike. But if you have kids, okay, who are going to school, who are going to this lesson and going to that lesson and going to music lessons and all of that, you kind of need a car. And I think we need, and this is not New York. This is not where we have subway stops on every corner. So I just think those issues of context and history, you know, have to be included in the thinking. And I also think that we, you know, this one size fits all does not work, will not work. And that we have to figure out ways to try to deal with North Capitol in terms of a both and perspective, as opposed to an either or perspective relative to these two plans.
Yeah, I think from a neutral perspective, this will be coming out loud and clear when we see the first results of the study of the whole corridor from DDOT. And I'm sure that we're all anxious to learn what they find, look at their recommendations, and to weigh in on that. We've got another comment here. Is North Capitol is identified as a transit priority corridor in the most recent Move DC. How is that accommodated in each plan? Do you want the Boulevard folk? You want to take that first there? And then
Sure.
Deckover North Capitol is identified as a transit priority corridor in most recent Move DC.
Sure. So for those not familiar, the Move DC plan is DDOT's framework transportation plan for the future, and they have been updating it this year. And one of the things they have focused on is identifying transit priority corridors where things like bus lanes will be encouraged and prioritized for future changes. So we were delighted to see that North Capitol Street is one of the corridors that they have proposed to add to the transit priority corridor plan. And the community boulevard vision is based, and one of its central elements is on the inclusion of bus lanes, because we think that's so important for equity, because we think that is the best way to create a more sustainable future for our families and children, and the most efficient way to move people in and out of the corridor.
Deckover, how is that Move DC, that concept accommodated in the Deckover plan? Any response to that?
So I would mention that in terms of, you know, in conversations with DDOT, they have stated that it is a priority bus lane space. I know the local traffic areas where buses currently travel, there are options that we could look at incorporating those. In the Move DC, it was our understanding that DDOT had not indicated bicycling as part of a priority space. But again, I think more engagement, we can look at different options for that.
Would it be fair to say that I guess we're going to hear from DC, DDOT, and says, how does this accommodate the Move DC plans when they start coming out with their study? I think that would be a fair statement.
Kirby, I think that's right. But I also think that it's fair to say that we're going to have to be creative, and we are fortunate to be at the beginning of this process, where, again, as I said earlier, we're going to have to be flexible. And we are already, as you can tell by both of these plans, thinking outside the box. And we're willing to continue that. And we understand that there are going to have to be some changes, and perhaps some significant changes. So, you know, I think that's one of the things we've been talking about and thinking about. And I don't think that we're in a position to roll out ideas that we haven't fully vetted just yet, but do know that this is top of mind for us.
There's another question here. It's a long sort of a statement and a comment, but addressed to the Deckovers is, how does keeping the Deckover 2 blocks truly address the issues at hand, specifically thinking about the deadly speed on North Capitol, traffic congestion and pollution leading to climate change? And there's a comment there, but someone from the Deckover side want to take that? How does this dealing with the 2 blocks truly address the issues at hand?
Well, hopefully it will be more than 2 blocks. What we talk about is approximately V Street to Seton Place. Okay, so in part, the actual length of the Deckover will be determined by the extent to which the city is willing to do a little digging so that it can be extended a little bit more. Okay. So what was the other part of the question?
Address the issues and specifically thinking about the deadly speed on North Capitol, traffic congestion, pollution leading to climate change. There's 3 specific.
Yeah, I can. Sorry, I'll say a couple words to that. So you're talking about as you go into the underpasses, different traffic calming measures, which Thaddeus talked about a couple of them. Obviously, enforcement is a big one that would need to be had in order to help reduce that. The green space obviously is very important. It's not 200 blocks long, but it is a space that is 30,000 square feet of potential space that could really change the adjacent communities. So I think there are certainly some benefits to that. Maybe not what you're thinking, but sorry if that didn't answer the question.
Yeah, the Boulevard plan talks about North Capitol. I didn't realize it was this wide, but they talk about North Capitol being 90 to 103, I think it is, feet wide. Okay, so when you go to one of those Deckover, one of those where the bridges are, like T Street, and you look over there and you start trying to imagine all that is going on, it is a lot more space than you would expect. It really is because of the width.
I think that question was addressed directly to the Deckover. I've got other questions here, but with the Boulevard, any comment on that?
I think I'll just say briefly that when we're talking about safety, we're not just talking about the underpasses. We're talking about the width of the road. And that's a problem throughout the corridor. As we mentioned earlier, there are dangerous crashes happening throughout. There are fatalities happening throughout. And I want to emphasize that the safety components of the community boulevard proposal are not just about eliminating underpasses. They're also about reducing traffic lanes with the intent of slowing cars in particular, because we know that they are the ones that are most responsible for those violent crashes.
I see 2 questions here that I could, I think, combine into one. One question is the Deckover expandable to the rest of the corridor? And another one, is there any consideration to expand the Boulevard vision further to north to Blair Road, where North Capitol Highway begins? I think that's something that the scope of both the Deckover project and the Boulevard would like to take. The first one there is the Deckover. Try the Deckover. Is the Deckover expandable to the rest of the corridor? Try that. And how about up to Blair Road? We'll try the Deckover first, and then we'll hear from the Boulevard.
Sure. I think what we've studied so far is the section that we've presented. However, we do think that there's potential that it could be stretched all the way up to New York Avenue if that's what people along that stretch want. But just as we're in the feasibility study part of this component, I think the same thing would have to happen as you have these ideas for other sections of the street. And certainly DDOT is going to be looking at more than just this little section. They're going to be looking at a much broader stretch. But in terms of feasibility, I think it's a different question as the road changes, certainly as the environment changes in terms of who lives around it. Is it businesses versus residential, and all of those, the characteristics of it change. I think the question becomes a bit more complicated. So, I mean, in theory, yes, it could, but in reality, we would have to lean into more expertise than we have available tonight.
For the Boulevard, I'm not sure how much of that particular question may be addressed to you in particular, but the second one, there any consideration to expand the Boulevard vision further north to Blair Road, where North Capitol Highway began?
Yeah, so what I do know is that I believe it's actually OP, the Office of Planning, is currently conducting the Cloverleaf study for the section of North Capitol just above Michigan there. And I think that I believe my understanding is that DDOT will be at least consulting with them and trying to kind of align somewhat with this feasibility study, understanding where that is. I don't know any details on exactly what that looks like. I think we would love to see these principles incorporated all the way up. There was a fatality up on that northern section of North Capitol Street 2 years ago. So what's put in the budget right now for this study is Mass to Michigan, but it does connect to that second study.
And if I could jump in, I would just add that, we've been talking a lot about how there are problems along the whole corridor. And, the reality is that I think that the real solutions to that problem are going to, in some ways, require corridor-wide treatment, because the reality is that our lives are connected, right? A bus that has priority lanes for a few blocks, but then has to sit in traffic for the next few blocks, is not ultimately going to be a game changer in terms of delivering more equity, delivering faster commutes to the people who deserve it most, or convince residents to give up their car and choose a more sustainable form of transportation. So, when we're talking about the boulevard stretching from Massachusetts Avenue to Michigan, we're definitely talking about bringing the community together north to south. And we would love, for elements of this plan to extend either further, farther up into Ward 4, all the way up to Blair Road someday.
I think both groups that have presented tonight are concentrating in one area, but hoping that there are some principles that could be extended. There's another question here. It says for the Deckover side there, you're addressing the Deckover over the existing underpass. If so, what about the after Randolph Place? I don't see that you address the additional added traffic that will come from the increased traffic from the new condos around McMillan and the Soldiers Home. I think part of that has been addressed, but for the Deckover folks, do you want to address that one?
Can you repeat the question? Because I don't, or maybe translate the question. I didn't quite catch it.
So the Deckover project is talking about decking over the existing underpass.
Yeah.
What about after Randolph? I don't see that it will address the added traffic that will come from the increased traffic from new condos to be built around McMillan and the Soldiers Home.
I mean, I think that's going to be a challenge for whatever alternative you prefer, is in terms of this additional development. I know that
Bertha, we seem to have lost you. But I think what she was getting at,
McMillan is going to have well over 2,300 underground. I said McMillan is a, can you hear now? No, it says
yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, well, yeah, I was going to say McMillan had, I know, or at least 2,300 underground parking spaces in their plan. Okay, so you're going to have a traffic problem because those 2,300 cars are going to have to get out on the road. One problem with dealing with the space that McMillan occupies, that would be North Capitol from Channing to Michigan, is that they have their own private plan for traffic control and traffic movement. So I'm not, and most of the streets within McMillan will become private streets that the city has already said they'll give those to McMillan. So this is really a further challenge to how you're going to kind of do all of the North Capitol corridor when pieces of it you don't have control of.
I think I've got a couple of more questions here, but I think that they overlap enough with the things that we've covered here. It is now 8:32, and to honor our hosts in the Eckington Civic Association who gave us this time from 7 to 8:30. I'd like to thank all the participants and the persons who joined us. And you do have contact information in the chat box there for both sides here. I think we should conclude this because Nick and Connor set this up to go from 7 to 8:30. I will leave the, oh, wait a minute, Nick is controlling us. I'd ask Nick leave this up for a couple of minutes so anyone who wants to take a look through the chat to get those addresses and whatnot. But please keep in touch with these things. And I think we are all of us, inclusive, the attendees and the panelists, we're waiting to see what does DDOT say when they come out with some of the first things that they do on this study here, because that's going to determine everything. We can think and we can dream, and we should think and we should dream, but DDOT's going to drop the hammer with saying, here's some specifics that we got to tighten up with. But I think on that note, thank you very much, all of you, and specifically for Eckington for hosting this